Welcome to Tea with TPS, a freewheeling conversation with thought leaders of the world. Today, we have a celebrity guest. In fact, I would call her a great personality. Shakespeare defined great in three different ways. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, some have greatness thrust upon them. Princess GOURI LAKSHMI BAYI belongs to the first two categories. She was born great as the niece of the last Maharaja of Travancore, and then she acquired greatness by being a writer, a poet, a thinker, and a philanthropist. So we have her with us in the context of a new book that she has published, History Liberated. This is the 13th book that she has produced in poems, writings, history of the temple, history of the royalty, etc. So she has come to be recognized as the chronicler of the Travancore family as well as its deity, Sri Padmanabha Swami. Welcome, Princess.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on a record that you have just established. This book, the 450-page tome, has been sold even before it was published. The first edition of 2,000 copies have been sold, and the second edition is in print. This, I think, is a record in publishing history in India. So congratulations on that. And it has also been so well produced that it is a collector's item. So this is something that is really commendable, and you and your publishers deserve congratulations on this. So let me ask you a few questions on this book. You say somewhere that you had started writing this book several years ago, 1995 or so. But then you put it aside because you felt that some unpleasant things may have to be said. But then an opportunity arose when you saw two books, one by Lakshmi Raghunandan and the other by Manu Pillai, which seemed to have given a distorted version of the recent history of Travancore and the royal family. So is that the reason why you resumed the writing of this book and has published it? In other words, can we say those two books provoked to bring out the whole story as you call the untold story? Is that the right thing to say?
Yes, it is. It is. First of all, Srini, before I reply to your query, let me convey my happiness at joining you in this prestigious show, and thank you for all the very good things you have said. I would request the viewers to take it with half a sack of salt at least. Anyway, that is one. Then it is true that Padmanabha Swami's grace that this book has created a record in the sense that the entire first edition of 2000 was taken care of before even the printing of the first word started. And the second edition, which is now under print, has over 500 copies orders to hand. I don't know whether I'm being overambitious or egoistic or whatever it is. But I don't think I'm being either when I say that I honestly and sincerely, reasonably hope that very soon a third edition will follow. Anyway, that is one. Now you have, yes, you had mentioned about my editor, my publisher, Mr. KPR, and his team of people, Giza, all of them, Konar. They have really an editor. They have all art director. They have all put a lot of work to it. KPR and Giza have worked overtime, I think. But when I speak of them, I acknowledge them. It's the first public platform I'm having on this book. So it would be remiss on my part, or it would be an extreme act of ingratitude if I don't at least mention my co-team, without whom this book would never have seen the light of day as it has seen now. with Professor Balakrishnan Nair, Professor Nadin Ganesh, look after the English. Professor Radha also same. Professor Srimati Uma Maheshwari, acknowledged as historian and scholar to look into the facts. And last but not least, a multi-dimensional dynamite, I would call her, Devu, who has been everything. She's there everywhere, doing everything, all-rounder, who has actually translated my written words into computer, and she has involved herself so much into it that she has become a part of it, like the others. To them all, to all my five, what should I call them, Pancha Pandavas or Pancha Kanyas, nothing will suit properly, so I don't think I will say that. So to all five of them, I have to express my gratitude after I prostrate in all humility, abject gratitude to Sri Padmanabha Swami, and before the memory of those mighty people, my uncle Pannamavan Chitrathirunal Maharaja and his illustrious mother, Rani Setupadu. Now,
thank you, Princess. But the fact that the book has been sold even before a review came out establishes one fact, that people have faith in you, because they have seen your earlier writings. They know that they can trust your authenticity. They believe that this would be a valuable addition to their library. And all these considerations, of course, you have been modest enough to distribute the credit to various people. But the fact that dominates this whole thinking of this record is really the credibility that you have established, and the style of literature and the approach to issues that you have proved through your previous works. So that is where I think we should give the credit to.
Thank you so much, anyway. Thank you so much. Anyway, I think that I will come to the answer to your question about the motivation behind this book, which had been commenced many years ago. Yes, it is true. It was commenced many years ago in the 1900s, and I remember how I put a stop to it when I was sitting in Pylon, the government guest house. I wrote the sentence, Maharaja, my uncle was born. And Sri Chitra, he was born. And Sri Padmanabha Swami smiled. I stopped it with that. And then I have been able to continue. You have asked me specifically, and I will reply specifically. Why I stopped was not because I feared unpleasant repercussions, but I felt that at that time my uncle hated publicity, and he might not have been very happy with the thought of my writing a book focused on him. That was one. And then I just found that it was impossible for me to write about him without going into so much of other problems. The emotions or the emotional price that I have paid many times, even now, for this book has been stiff. I have paid in terms of emotion. I have paid in terms of unseen tears of blood from my heart, which were lifeblood. I have paid in terms of recollected memories of things which are no longer here, of losses which can never be compensated, losses of human beings. But however, I'm so grateful that I have been able to put this book across. That time I stopped it because it was not all that imperative. But many people did tell me, write something, because when we are here, my generation is here, if we do not put something, there may not be anything authentic. I repeat the word authentic, available in the literary world. When I was just toying with the idea, putting it away, then came, you have yourself mentioned, a few literary offerings to the readers by people who thought perhaps that they were doing the right thing, who thought that perhaps they were painting a very fine picture. I'm not here to assess their work or to criticize their intentions or ambitions or achievements or the otherwise. I'm merely telling that their books were definitely, as far as we were concerned, in many places, not just defamatory or unfortunate, they were downright cruel, going against any of the tenets of dharma, very, very poor. So I'm still not mentioning anybody by name. I leave it to anybody to conclude who they may be or what their works are. I do not want to mention anything about that by name. But it is true that my book, to an extent, has been, to an extent only, not fully, an attempt to put the record straight. The other part, many things which have been not said, naturally they would not say. Many things which have not been said, many anecdotes, many incidents, many events, many issues, I have been able to, God has permitted me to thread them all together into a chain. And our own memories, we are, my sister, brother, and I, to an extent, our next generation, we are living legend. We are living records. We are living records of those great legends who continue to be living legends. They can never be put into any archives and forgotten. They continue, throbbing, vibrant, vital, alive, challenging the very time itself. That's my opinion, incident. So anyway,
you do say, Princess, at one point that some of those writings were made in yellow ink. And that's a very significant statement, because there could be an element of slander or an element of distortion of history. I think that is what probably prompted you. Otherwise, you probably would have written a biography of your uncle and the grandmother, and that would have been logical. And but this probably gave you an opportunity to set the record straight, and also to tell the story, as you call the untold story of these two people who underwent several situations of concern as a result of the general atmosphere within the palace between the personalities involved.
Yes, you are right. It's because of the yellow paper manifestation with all emphasis. My own way of thinking, strong emphasis. That is definitely one of the reasons that made me take up the huge challenge. I did not know how to start, how to proceed, how to handle the situation, how to conclude, nothing. I was at a sea. I did not know how to proceed. At that time that I prayed to Padmanabha Swami. All my 12 books I have not been able to write without his blessings. But this book, please do not stop with your blessings. Please get up, come, hold my hand and make me write. And he has done it. I think that is reflected in the sensational demand that it has faced. And it is only because of that I have been able to proceed. It just, and just move as though propelled by some invisible or visible force. Now, with regard to the, as you said, I might not have gone into a lot of details had not this in literature come, the literature which preceded it, by which I felt was necessary to be corrected, or at least my view should be presented. And many of these things, Mr. Srinivasan, I must tell you, is that many places where people could take it as something negative or something, you're pointing your finger at something. In many of those instances, I have quoted from the very same books written by the very same people who have prompted me to write this book. I have quoted from their books. Chapter, page, title, author. And it is their words that I am quoting. It's not my own conclusions. Yeah. In certain areas, yes, I have mentioned my own conclusions. But many places where people might think, oh, this is very negative. It is their own words, what they have said, that I have quoted. And that gives me immense satisfaction.
Well, can you briefly tell us what was the major deficiency in these stories? I have read only one of them, and that reads more like a novel than like history. And the author claims that he has done a lot of research, which he has done because he has quoted extensively. So the very value of the book, because it is readable, it is written by a young man who has worked hard on it, has a certain credibility. And that is where probably the problem arises, because people started taking it as, as the Bible, as the right picture. Probably that is why you needed to correct it. Do you agree with that?
Yes, because both the books, the other book also, they have quoted what they call records. They have given the record number, they have given where it is found, everything. So naturally, when anybody who is not such an involved person reads that book, that person would definitely feel that this is very correct. They have utilized the records and they have quoted the records. So how can you deny the record? Now here I have to tell you one thing. I am not saying that these records did not exist. I am not denying the existence of the records. I am denying I'm sorry to use the term authenticity. I am denying the authenticity of the record. What is the
interpretation? And the interpretation, I presume.
Interpretation, no, but actual record is there. So it's there in black and white.
Still you can interpret in different ways.
The spirit of the law and the letter of the law and all those things are there. But in this case, I would like to present to you very humbly, what is a record? A record from a person, it originates from a point of authority and culminates in a point of authority. And if that point of authority accepts this, then it becomes a record. The report becomes a record. Many of the records also which have been introduced in the books, earlier books, many of those records, they originated at a period in Travancore history, which was negatively positioned as far as my uncle, Maharaja THIRUNAL and his mother were concerned. It was during the period of regency that many of the records went. And the Diwan, of course, is somebody who enjoys the confidence of the people in power. The resident also was very much on the side of the persons in power. My grandmother was nobody at that time. My uncle had become the Maharaja, but he was a Maharaja in minority. Every word or every letter, please in capital, minority. A minority which it is feared would proceed to a permanent minority. Let that be there. Let that be there for the moment. Now these reports, they were not records. These reports originated from Travancore, from people who were very displeased for whatever reason it may be, with my grandmother, or better still, who were very pleased with the existing dispensation. They were very pleased and happy with the existing dispensation. Maybe it had much to recommend. But at the same time, that pleasure became displeasure on the other side. Second thing is, that these reports reached the Viceroy. Viceroy is accepting these records because they come from the resident in the Diwan. He has no need to institute an inquiry commission. So he accepts the thing and sends it to Britain. It has become a record. It has become a record. So all these reports, which have originated from Travancore, which was anti-Maharaja and Maharani Sethu Parvati Bai, became records by the time they reached Britain. Those are the records that have been quoted. They are there. I do not deny their existence. I repeat, I deny their authenticity. The way that they have been used. Anyway.
That is why you have done a great service to your uncle and your grandmother, definitely. But shall we go back to the beginning of history, as it were, when these two young princesses were adopted? Hasn't there been a problem in the family? This is not the first time that this adoption was made. And each time, wasn't it a gamble, this adoption? Because you really don't know what will come out of it and what kind of heirs to the throne will be born, etc. Is that been a problem of Travancore history? This adoption necessity and how it has turned out?
Travancore has faced quite a few adoptions, one after the other. Unfortunate, one would say. Unfortunate that the necessity arose. Not right. Unfortunate choice of people, but the necessity was unfortunate. But by and large, I think the adoptions were all one way or the they had much to contribute to the history of Travancore. And coming to the recent one under question, Maharani's Setu Lakshmi by the Maharani Regent and Maharani Setu Parvati Bai. They in 1900 they were adopted, and they also both the regent, Maharani Regent, that's a senior Maharani as she was later called, and my grandmother, who was sometime called the junior Maharani. Both of them have contributed greatly to Travancore and its development. We cannot deny that. Both of them have. One, the regent or the senior Maharani, with the power she could command. My grandmother, with the power which was not hers to command, but because my uncle was also there, she could also share her views with him, and they would have common discussions and come to conclusions. So that was a vicarious power, if you can call it a power. It was more an exchange of ideas and more cooperation and exchange of ideas. Anyway, they have done so. I cannot say that those adoptions were unfortunate. The necessity to adopt may have been, it would have been better if it had not been there.
No, but the arrival of two princesses, you did not know who will have the first child, what kind of child will have, who will they marry. All these are uncertainties. And therefore, yes, it is a recipe for creation of problems. But it has worked out all right eventually, except for that regency period became necessary. One had two daughters and the other had two sons and a daughter. It worked out fairly equally, I would say. But this was a difficult situation, and it needed a lot of patience, affection, consideration, loyalty to the family, to the royalty itself, Padmanabha Swami. All these were necessary for this kind of of situation to come out productively and effectively in the future in history. So there is certainly the eyes of Sri Padmanabha Swami on it, because ordinary human beings would have behaved differently and maybe more problems would have been created. But eventually it turned out to be a fair configuration for the family.
Yes. But whether the regent's branch of the family felt it was exactly fair, because she had two daughters, whereas her younger sister married 1 year later, and who had a child 1 year later than she.
Yes.
No, she was married 1 year later, but it was the younger sister who became a mother first, and the younger sister had two sons, Maharaja of the future and Elaraja of the future, and a daughter who would be the Mutha Thambiran of Attingal in the future. After, of course, future. And it was only after my younger uncle, Uttaranandal, was born, did the regent have her first daughter and then her second daughter. So the regent Maharani might not have felt it's quite fair. She must have felt perhaps that it was not at all fair. But anyway, then what can you do? Even if you have a child, biological child, of course, the chances are always better chances for everything to go forward nicely. There have been so many prodigal sons and daughters. We do not know. Finally, it's all written there. And as you yourself very, very correctly observed, that Padmanabha Swami was with us. For us, Sri Vanji Bhupa Kuladevata Vishwarupa. That is Padmanabha. Sri Vanji Bhupa Kuladevata Vishwarupa. O Vishwarupa Padmanabha, who is the Kuladevam, the dynastic deity of the Travancore royal family. He looked after us.
So in a sense, he took care of a very complex situation. So we have to see this in that context. Human beings can be subject to rivalries, envy, all kinds of things. But eventually, if we look back at history, perhaps there was some justice somewhere. But the difference between the other literature and here and your book is that in the other literature, there has been a tendency to portray the regent Maharani as some kind of a victim of circumstances. But actually what had happened was it was the regency which contributed to the complications in respect to your grandmother and your uncle. Because if that period was not there, perhaps the continuity of history would have been more smooth.
Yes. Victimization. How much victimization they underwent. I have been forced to mention in my book. lot of victimization, lot of mudslinging, lot of even criminal activities pointed at them for what? For instance, there is a place where black magic, human sacrifice, yes, that much
I
is
was going
also
to ask you that. Assassination attempts, human
assassination.
sacrifice, animal sacrifice, black magic, all kinds of allegations were made. And therefore it must have been very unpleasant for all of them to have gone through these. That's why I'm saying that there is a certain amount of destiny in all this, and it turned out to be right for the country or the state, and also for the families who are still respected not only in Travancore but also in India and the rest of the world. So eventually it all settled, but then the process must have been very painful for many of them. Even the young Maharaja himself, in the very early years, how much he must have gone through. Of course, all of them you could not record, but basically, I think his own growth and development were somewhat inhibited by the fact that there was, on the one hand, the Regent Rani, on the other hand, the British resident. Then you have others, servants and staff who are always manipulating things or inventing stories. So it must have been a difficult childhood for him, don't you think?
It was, and he was a very sensitive person. All along, he remained very sensitive. It would have been terrible for him to have undergone what we have undergone. He never would speak about it. Even to us, he never would speak about his trials and tribulations. He would never speak about his successes and triumphs. He would always put everything, submit everything as a garland at the feet of Bhagavan. And as you have said, there is a destiny, quoting Shakespeare, I think it was Shakespeare who said it, there is a destiny that shapes our ends, few them how we will. That has happened. And as you also said, the goodwill of people, the affection, the regard, the respect of people for the family as a rule, it includes the Regent Maharani also, not excludes, including the Regent Maharani, the goodwill and respect people have, and the goodwill and consideration and respect they still have for those of us left behind, it is very, very telling. And we are so grateful. In fact, in my book, in this particular book, I have introduced myself in one sentence, which is the same sentence I am repeating here, that I am a child of good fortune. Saubhagyatin the Sandati, to have been born into this family, into this land, into this state, and to have become a part of the people of Travancore or Greater Kerala.
And your book gives the glimpses of how the British managed the principalities, in the sense that they are not a very, at least as I read in the book, not a very powerful presence in an everyday management of the state. Is it right? But at the same time, they kept a very kindly eye on the situation and tried to help the person in power. And that is probably the reason why they were inclined more towards the regent than about the other members of the family. And they were even receptive at one point when a suggestion was made that the regency could be extended. So this shows that the British were not so much of a dictatorship in terms of dealing with the family. Do you agree? Or at least that is the impression I get.
Yes, I mean, with regard to the daily administration of Travancore and things like that, the High Command did not, I don't think the High Command interfered in an unbearable way or anything. But when decisions on moot matters came, naturally, their input was unavoidable. And we cannot forget that the resident was a representative of the British Crown. And the resident was very much a factor, an in factor in the administration. But most of the residents and the people in power, whoever it is, got on reasonably well. So that was not a problem for those in power. But for instance, I will tell you one thing. There was a man called Captain Harvey. Captain Harvey was supposedly a tutor to the young Maharaja.
Yes, I read about that.
Yeah, so I don't have to say anything more. And for my uncle, who was a embodiment of courtesy and refinement, you may notice in his speech on accession, when he gave a speech, he has thanked so many people. But there's a very, very pointed lacuna where Captain Harvey is concerned. He does not mention Captain Harvey at all. And to us, I'm talking about myself, my sister, and all that. When he used to, very rarely, when he used to speak of what happened earlier and all that, sometimes he would touch on his minority years, but it's always sugar-coated in one way or the other. He would say there were difficulties. That he did not sugarcoat. But he underplayed it. The only person about whom he had spoken in somewhat strong expressions was about Captain. He said, Captain Harvey the spy, and coming from my uncle. And he has not said bad words about anybody else, unlike the books which have been lavish and generous in their discriminatory or despairing remarks and all that. Uncle has very rarely said bad things about anybody. That was not he. Only Captain Harvey, I distinctly remember his saying, Captain Harvey the spy.
Well, as a tutor, he had access to the Maharaja and he had access to the family. And so it was very easy for him to spy for anyone he would have liked to do. But let us talk about the role of the Diwan in all this. C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer was there during the Regency, is it? Because I was trying to connect. He was there.
C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer was not there officially during the Regency. He was a family friend, and he had made his presence felt even pre-Regency's end. Even during Maharaja Moolandrama's reign, at times Sir C.P.'s presence was felt. And Sir C.P. was a family friend. He was not in any way involved during the Regency, officially the administration. After my uncle Pannamavan, after Mother Chitra THIRUNAL took over, he was appointed the legal advisor, political legal advisor. And in 1936, he became the Diwan.
By then, the Maharaja had already taken over.
Yeah, my uncle took over in 1931.
Yeah, right. So his Diwanship was during the Maharaja's time only. So he didn't have a decisive role in the problems that arose at the Regent's time.
Yes.
But I read somewhere that in the process of fixing the date for the transfer of power, he played a role, and he helped your grandmother to contact Delhi and get a decisive decision on that. And there, C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer seems to have played a role. Is it right?
Sir C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer had connections with Lord Wellington. So using his contact, my grandmother was able to get an interview for my grandmother with Lord Wellington, who was at the summer capital, Simla, at that time. And
so she traveled all the way there to meet him and talk about this particular issue. That was a very, very, very important initiative that she took, because she felt that this might otherwise drag on.
It would have. There's no doubt about it, because they are already planned, chalked out an exhaustive itinerary for the next year also. He should have taken over 1 year back. But it was going on and on and on. So instead of taking over at 18, he took over much later. And that would also not have happened had she not called on Lord Wellington. That interview was fixed by Sir C.P. But otherwise, she went, she met him, and his opening sentence was, "Maharani, what can I do for you?" And she said, "Your Lordship, Your Excellency, can you tell me why the transfer of power, actual authority to my son is being delayed inordinately?" And then it appears this is all what hearsay. I cannot produce any record here for you, like other people have. This is hearsay, what we have heard from maybe the horse's mouth.
But the decision was taken. But the decision was taken at that point.
It was taken because no, it was not taken at that point. No. Then his reply was, I hear that he's not quite with it. My grandmother, that is her brilliance. What did he say? I hear that he is not quite with it. In fact, reports sent to him from very, very important areas that my uncle was a moron and things like that. Now, in the perspective of people who have written our previous books, that also could become a record. There is a record showing that Maharaja is a moron. That also you can say is a record. But anyway, So then
But Daga deliberately spreading stories in order to continue the regency. This is like the British never wanted to leave the country. They always said that the present setup cannot rule the country. That is a standard excuse to deny freedom to nations. They'll say, oh, no, these people cannot rule. It is a white man's burden. That kind of an image must have been created.
If by some chance my uncle was found unsuitable to rule Travancore, then obviously the regency will have to get extended till my younger uncle, between whom the 10 years difference between the two brothers, till my younger uncle became a major. So that means at least for 10 years the regency will have to be extended.
But these are unthinkable because he turned out to be one of the best Maharajas in Travancore history. So even talking about it is irksome and irritating to think that such a man could be projected like that. So let us leave it there.
But my grandmother's reply to this, to what Lord Wellington said, I hear that he's not part with. And she responded immediately. She said, Your Excellency, I did not know that the British Empire operated on hearsay. Because he said, I mean, how she respond? He was taken aback. And his sense of fair play, he said, what do you want me to do? She said, don't listen to me. Don't listen to anybody. Get him down yourself. Examine him, talk to him, and take a decision. Whatever be your decision, if you think that he is good, let him become the king in right. If you think he is not suitable, that's another point. But whatever be your decision, I will accept it and I will not go against it. So he said, right, I will do that. And he put a few conditions that she should not be present, she should not meet, etc., etc. And then all the rest is history. And Maharaja came, his visit to Viceroy, they tried their best to delay it. Colonel Pritchard was the regent here. He tried his best to delay it. He said that if the investiture is preponed, the present dispensation would feel that its face is blackened, etc., etc. So many things he said. But anyway, Lord Wellington got him down. He was so impressed with him after 1.5 hours that he gave instructions by wire to get ready for transfer of power immediately. And they spent 1 week together, Lord Wellington and Maharaja. They went horse riding and tennis playing and all sorts of things they did. And he became a very good friend. And when the investiture came, Wellington's letter itself is so revealing. I have included it in the book.
Yeah, but in the rest of the image of your grandmother, that's the junior Rani, she's a docile person. She put up with all this, with forbearance, etc. But this one particular action, I think, raises her level of understanding and the ability to deal with issues to a higher level, because she had the courage to go and talk to him and insist that they should not go by hearsay, but must test and then decide. I think it was a heroic move by her, and I'm glad that you have recorded it. And coming back to the regency, sorry, you're saying something.
She was not a docile person. She was a strong person. She had to be strong. Which mother would not be strong if her son's life is in danger? Which mother would not be strong if her son's future is threatened? Which mother
in adversity, she did not react too furiously to her sister, did she?
That she has never. No.
That's what I mean.
That respect is always there. That never. But otherwise, she was a strong person.
Right. Anyway, about the regency, you yourself have been fair to her, to the Regent Rani, in saying that she had several accomplishments. You have in fact listed them. And this is fairly well known. Many people think that as a regent, she was effective, she was thoughtful. Particularly one point which is often mentioned is the importance she gave to education and women's welfare. And on education, one of the things that she said is still being quoted, that education of the people should be the responsibility of the state. The state cannot escape that responsibility to private enterprises or missionaries or service society. Rather than that, the state must bear the responsibility. Of course, it is not a practical idea today. Today, I am the one who plead for more and more private investment in education. But this particular words of the Regent Rani has gone into history. Whether it is right or not, I don't know. As a very important contribution. And also the Vaikam Satyagraha, how she handled it. You yourself mentioned it. Then there is this, the story about talking in the, putting together the Templatory Proclamation in time for the Maharaja to, because Maharaja did it when he was very young. So obviously the groundwork was done by the regent. So there are these, what shall we say, positive signs about her, as you yourself say. Where does that come from?
No, I have to make a very, very urgent correction. That is, the groundwork for Templatory had nothing to do with the regent. She had nothing to do with the Templatory Proclamation. In fact, she was not really I don't want to go into that, but she was, she had nothing to do with it. And as you read the book, you will find those parts very, very clear. Vaikam Satyagraha, yes, but it was a very, very difficult situation at that time. That definitely she did it. She opened the roads of the Vaikam temple, all except the eastern road, which is the main road leading to the temple. All the other three roads she opened.
Aren't those things harbingers to what was coming in that sense?
No, but not. She was got to temple entry. Her attitude or her actions were very, very different. I do not want to talk of that on a public platform. Anyway, it's already mentioned in the book, but definitely she was not a person who was a factor to encourage the Templatory Proclamation.
This misunderstanding, perhaps I read it somewhere, because of the short period the Maharaja had to write this and test it out and talk to people and then implement it. Mahatma Gandhi also played a big role in that, we know. But so I had read somewhere that the preparation was done by the regent.
No,
anyway,
not at all. Not at all. Not at all. In fact, one of her granddaughter writes that she was not consulted. And she was unhappy, but that's what her granddaughter herself has said. No, the regent had nothing to do with the temple entry, but Vaikam Satyagraha, yes, most definitely she did. And with regard to the education, while what you have mentioned may be true, I'm not 100% sure, but the original idea that education should be the responsibility of the state, so that the citizens of the state would become better citizens, more responsible, etc., etc., etc. Compulsory free education, state responsibility, was in 1817 by the Regent Rani GOURI Parvati Bai, Uttarta THIRUNAL Rani GOURI Parvati Bai, which is called Re-Edict on Education. She was Maharaja Swati THIRUNAL's aunt, mother's younger sister, who ruled as the regent till Maharaja Swati THIRUNAL could take over.
Then it is my mistake. I am confusing the two regions, perhaps.
Many people have used that region and this region. While I am not in any way belittling Maharani Regent's role in women's education, she was also interested. This particular thing, this was Regent Maharani Gauri Parvati Bai, not Setu Lakshmi Bai, Gauri Parvati Bai. And this re-edict in education was the first, all world first, when government-sponsored education was made known to all. And I think, Mr. Srinivasan, with your huge contacts in the UNESCO, I have been told that there is a place where this particular re-edict has been displayed in the UNESCO. And the UNESCO recognizes and remembers it many times.
Oh, good. That's where I must have got confused when they said the Regent Rani did this. All right. Okay, I'm glad you corrected it, at least for my own information. Now we go to the last part of our conversation. The circumstances which led to her departure from Trivandrum. And that is something which has been played up in some of these books. That, after she ceased to be the regent, a lot of pressure was put on her and made life difficult for her. She was not given the right palace to live in. I don't know, whatever there are. And therefore, it was not a voluntary departure. But your book very clearly says that all these decisions were taken by her and by her own will, how we wanted to go, where you wanted to go, and there was no particular pressure from anyone. So how do we reconcile the two?
No, the regent, her official place of stay was the settlement palace. Very huge area, very gracious palace, and today it is Sri Chitra's wing. It is one of the arms of the Sri Chitra in Pujapura. A huge area. That was her place she was staying, but then she had a number of palaces and houses in many other places, which she preferred to uh, the settlement palace. And especially the Halson Castle, Kovalam, which has come under limelight. And that entire Kovalam property which belongs to Leela will belong to her. Velayani Agricultural College campus and the building belong to her. Like this, there were so many places which belong to her. And she was, there was no question of pressurizing the Maharani to leave or to not leave or anything. What happened was, which she had only two daughters and both were settled and married and they both went off. They were not, I suppose, very fond of the Travancore sands. So one of the daughters settled down the elder daughter settled down in Bangalore. The younger daughter settled down in what is now today known as Chennai. And she and her husband, the Batagoy Tamran, were many times alone here, except when she got down her sisters and brothers and all that. Otherwise, maybe she was feeling lonely, and then she had a slight cardiac problem at one period of time. And then this problem happened. The union, the servants joined together, domestic servants joined together in Pujapara, and they formed a union. Now, that is not a very happy thing for anybody. But that union originally fizzled out, but again it came back, they reunited, and life was becoming really difficult for her. I mean, you're surrounded by a hostile or unfriendly and non-cooperative staff, and you don't feel secure. You don't feel comfortable. What if they barge in and try to harm you? We don't know anything. Just the two of them, and they are not exactly young. And even if they were young, so her granddaughter, her eldest granddaughter, Rukmini Bai, who's a very famous artist. She's Rukmini Devi Prasad now. Very, very famous artist. Her pet granddaughter, she was insisting, Amma, please don't stay there alone. Come. You either settle down in Bangalore or Madras. And anyway, by that time, monarchy is over. Republic of India has already come. So come. What is the use? What is binding you there? Come. When this, and that was in her thought, she was basically a very family person, somebody who loved to be with her family, with her grandchildren. Made her so happy. She was a family person. So she was missing that very much. And when this union came again, and it raised its somewhat ugly head, I think she would have thought, and she contacted the Kerala government, the chief secretary of the Kerala government. I have no idea whether she told my uncle or not. I don't know. But then he was no longer in administration of power. He was an ordinary man. 1956 Republic. So she asked the chief secretary and he made arrangements. And within a short while, everything was arranged and she left. The staff did not know any of these plans. Just 2 hours before her departure only, they knew. They were so stunned that they could not react. She got into the car with her husband and they went to Kambanur and they got their private double coach, first class coach, and they left. Certain parts of that particular period, they are very poignant, especially her departure, poignant. And she went to the Padmanabha Swami temple. Before she left settlement. And on her way to the railway station, she asked the driver to take her to the Padmanabha Swami temple. She sat in the car and wished the temple, and then she moved on. She gave some coins to the driver to put in the hundi, and she went on. She booked the temple.
Yeah, she's supposed to have said to Lord Padmanabha that I'm leaving, I'm sorry, some such thing. You have quoted her as saying that.
Yes, I have also written it, that you say sentences. But she, after the temple entry, her presence in the Padmanabha Swami temple, I do not want to say anything more about that. Anyway, I'm saying.
How did she settle all the official and personal issues during this period? What did she do with all the property which belonged to her? She sold off or gave to the children, or what happened?
I have no idea. I mean, many of them she has sold, but what she did to everything, I do not know. And she she had a lot of properties. In fact, there's a statement made by her granddaughter in a book. She said, once I owned the whole state. Today I can barely have a roof over my head. Now, that's a very, 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 a sentence which hits. But then if you look at it, she had so many properties, she had so many palaces. And today what you see as the Kalyana, Lalita Mahal Kalyana Mandal in the fourth, that Hindi Pracharas Sabha, huge building, Saraswati Vilasam Palace. From Saraswati Vilasam Palace nearly up to the SP Fort Hospital, entire area was hers. So like that, so much of land they had, building land. You sell everything or you dispose of everything, you give everything away. What she did, I don't know. Then how can you say I have nothing? That is your option. You did it. So that part of it is not mentioned. It's not shown. So like this, there are misleading presentations or representations or misinterpretations in many places, which make the readers a little confused on many things. But anyway, so she went like that, and after that, she has never come back to it. She went in 19.
Yes, that's what is being interpreted as some kind of victimization. That is what they are alleging. But anyway, the rest of the book is an excellent, elucidation of Maharaja's own contribution that has never been disputed, that has always been highlighted, and most of the things one knew. But you have done full justice to him in explaining what the implications of his reforms were and how he managed those issues and how he was so close to the entire family. Everything is so well brought out. That part of the book is, of course, is a very valuable record of history. So I must compliment you on that. There you are absolutely, you feel free, I think, to write this story because there was no contradiction possible. So that's also a very good contribution that you have made to the book. And then lastly, the essays by the others in the family. I didn't read them very carefully because I didn't have the time. But obviously, that also adds to the credibility of your book because everybody in the family thinks the same way and contributed the same way, and you have maintained that kind of homogeneity in the family. I think that is the value of that part of the book. So, on the whole, I think you have done several things. One, of course, is setting the record straight, as it were, present the other side of the story without malice, but pointing out historical facts. That is one important thing. You have recognized whatever good that Regent Rani has done and her regent's administration, in spite of all the issues which were there. Then you talked about the Maharaja's own accomplishments, and therefore it's a solid book. It is worth 470 pages, and it's beautifully done. So I think this will go down in history as your magnum opus. That is the masterpiece. Maybe you'll write a greater book later, but as of now, I would certainly say it's a magnum opus, and whoever has invested in it will never regret. They will have a collector's item not only to keep in your shelf, but also to read and understand. So congratulations once again, and thank you for spending so many valuable minutes of yours with me because I know you are a very busy person. So and appreciate that, and I hope our viewers will have a perspective about the book even before they are able to read it. Thank you very much, Princess.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. Thank you for everything. Thank you. Namaskar.